What if your wedding night was not a promise of love, but a collision of lust and vengeance? What if the Alpha who once swore to destroy you now claimed your body as his bride, possessive, dangerous, and merciless in passion? This is not a gentle love story. This is a tale where desire burns hotter than moonlight, where every stolen touch is forbidden, and every kiss tastes of both fury and need. Imagine being pinned beneath the vengeful Alpha, his lips devouring yours, his hands tracing fire across your skin, while your heart trembles between fear and unbearable pleasure. Bride of the Vengeful Alpha is not just a fantasy. It is an intoxicating storm of power, dominance, and irresistible hunger. A story that will make your pulse race, your lips part in longing, and leave you craving more. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Snap of Two Hearts, the place where fantasy and romance burn together. Today, I bring you a brand new love story, Bride of the Vengeful Alpha. This is a story of danger and passion, of a forbidden marriage between enemies, where lust and love collide. If you feel your heart racing already, then don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the Snap of Two Hearts so you never miss the next part. And if you want me to continue writing this into a full novel, tell me in the comments below. I'll be watching for your words. The night was alive with a dangerous kind of beauty. The moon hung full and swollen in the heavens, spilling silver light across the dark forest, as though blessing the union about to take place. Celine's breath came shallow, her chest rising and falling beneath the delicate fabric of her gown. It was not just a dress. It was a shroud of innocence, wrapped around a heart that trembled at the thought of what was to come. She could hear the low growl of wolves in the distance, the sound of drums echoing from the pack's sacred grounds. But louder than all of that was the furious rhythm of her own pulse. This was her wedding night, not a night of joy, but of surrender. Yet even as dread twisted in her belly, another truth burned hotter, sharper, and utterly forbidden. The thought of Alpha Kale, the man she was about to be bound to, made her body ache in ways she could not understand. He was her enemy, the monster in every story told at her bedside. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she imagined the press of his hands, the heat of his mouth, the kind of hunger no woman could run from. Alpha Kale appeared from the shadows like the embodiment of the night itself. His tall figure moved with lethal grace, every step exuding power. The leather of his tunic clung to broad shoulders and a chest built from years of dominance, and his gray eyes glimmered with a storm that promised both destruction and desire. When his gaze fell on Celine, it was not the gaze of a man. It was the gaze of a predator, a wolf who had finally cornered his prey. Yet within that hunger lay something else, a spark that made her thighs press together in secret need. She hated herself for it. Hated the way her body betrayed her with every racing heartbeat. And when he reached her, towering over her trembling frame, Kale did not speak at once. Instead, he simply stood there, his presence pressing against her like heat, like a hand closing around her throat without ever touching her. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, the kind that made the world fade until only they existed. Bride and Alpha, bound by vengeance, tangled in fate. The vows were spoken before the pack, but Celine barely heard them. Every word was drowned by the nearness of Kale, by the way his hand found hers, calloused and strong. His grip was firm, almost punishing, yet it set fire racing through her veins. The bond sealed in that moment was not one of peace. It was a claim, raw and unyielding. His thumb brushed the back of her hand, and she swore she felt a shiver run straight to her core. It was not tenderness, no, it was possession. But possession could be intoxicating, and Celine felt herself sway with the force of it. As Kale spoke his final vow, his voice low and commanding, she dared to lift her eyes to his. What she saw there stole her breath, anger, yes, but beneath it a hunger that mirrored her own. She realized then that this marriage was not only the sealing of vengeance. It was the beginning of a dangerous game of desire, one she could not win, yet one she was already aching to play. When the ceremony ended, the drums still echoing into the night, Cale did not release her hand. Instead, he drew her closer, so close she could smell the faint musk of pine and smoke clinging to his skin. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, and spoke words that made her knees weaken. "From this moment, you belong to me. Body, soul, every breath you take, mine." The timbre of his voice was enough to unravel her, low and rough, like velvet over steel. She shivered, and his hand slid to the small of her back, guiding her toward the pack house where the consummation awaited. Every step felt like falling deeper into a world where danger and desire were indistinguishable. The whispers of the pack followed them, hushed and heavy, but Celine's focus was consumed by the heat radiating from Cale's body. When he glanced down at her, their eyes met, and the raw promise there made her heart throb with both dread and unbearable anticipation. The moment the doors closed behind them, Cale did not hesitate. He pressed her against the wall, his mouth descending on hers with a ferocity that stole her breath. It was not a kiss, it was a conquest, hard and hungry, tasting of rage and undeniable need. Celine gasped, her hands instinctively clutching at his chest, but instead of pushing him away, she found herself pulling him closer. His tongue slid against hers, demanding, devouring, leaving her trembling. The heat of his body pressed against every curve of hers, and the world outside ceased to exist. His hands roamed her sides, claiming her, mapping every inch as though she were his territory. And though her mind screamed that this was wrong, her body betrayed her with a desperate arch, a soft moan spilling into his mouth. In that moment, Celine understood the terrifying truth. She was not only bound to the Vengeful Alpha by duty, she was bound to him by desire, fierce and unrelenting. Cale's kiss left Celine breathless, her lips swollen from his hunger, her body trembling as though every nerve had been awakened. He pulled back only for a moment, his eyes burning with a feral glow that made her shiver with both fear and longing. "You taste like fire," he growled softly, his voice a dangerous caress. Celine's chest rose and fell rapidly, and though she wanted to turn away, she couldn't. His gaze held her captive, stripping away every defense until she was nothing but raw need in his hands. And when his thumb brushed her lower lip, smearing the heat of his kiss across her mouth, she knew there was no turning back. He lifted her easily, her gown spilling like water around them, and carried her to the great bed draped in furs. The room was dark except for the moonlight pouring through the high windows, bathing them in silver. Cale set her down with a gentleness that shocked her, his large hands framing her face for a fleeting second. But then his mouth was on her neck, kissing, biting, tasting, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin until her soft gasp echoed through the chamber. Celine arched beneath him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. Every part of her body betrayed her, begging silently for more, even as her mind whispered of danger. She had never felt so alive, so consumed, so utterly at the mercy of another. "Tell me you hate me," Cale murmured against her throat, his lips trailing fire down to her collarbone. Celine opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. Hate should have been easy. It was the truth she had clung to for years. And yet, as his hand slid along her thigh, parting the fabric of her gown to reveal the soft skin beneath, all she could do was moan softly, her nails raking down his back. He smirked against her skin, his breath hot. "Your body speaks louder than your words, little bride." The shame of his truth burned her cheeks, but even shame couldn't drown the waves of pleasure flooding her veins. Celine's world spun as he claimed her mouth again, this time slower, deeper, like a kiss meant to both punish and worship. She tasted him, smoke, wild forest, danger, and it left her trembling. Cale's hands explored her curves with a mix of reverence and dominance, his touch rough enough to remind her who he was, but tender enough to make her ache for more. She had expected violence, cruelty, but instead she found herself unraveling beneath a man who knew exactly how to break her walls with every caress. The war between their bloodlines melted in the heat of their bodies, leaving only raw, undeniable desire. For a moment, Celine closed her eyes and let herself forget the weight of their past. She let herself feel only the brush of his lips, the warmth of his chest pressed to hers, the rhythm of his heartbeat against her skin. This was not the story of a prisoner and her captor, nor of a bride forced into marriage. It was the story of two souls colliding, burning brighter than the moon above them. And as Kale whispered her name like a prayer, Celine realized with terrifying clarity, she was falling. Falling into a love she was never meant to feel, into a passion that could either destroy them or save them both. The night stretched around them, endless and wild, as though the moon itself watched their union. Kale's body hovered over Celine's, his shadow swallowing hers, his breath hot against her ear. She braced herself for cruelty, but instead his touch softened, his fingertips tracing the curve of her cheek, the slope of her collarbone, the trembling line of her waist. It was maddening, this mixture of dominance and tenderness. Celine's breath hitched when his lips brushed her jawline, almost reverent, as though he were both punishing her and worshipping her in the same heartbeat. "You don't understand what you've done to me," Kale whispered, his voice rough but strangely fragile. His confession stole Celine's thoughts, shattering the idea of him as only a monster. She wanted to ask what he meant, but her words were lost in a sigh as his mouth closed over her breast through the thin fabric, teeth grazing just enough to make her cry out softly. The sound made Kale groan low in his throat, his hunger vibrating through her body. The wolf in him was barely leashed, and she could feel it in every demanding kiss, every urgent brush of his hands. Yet behind that ferocity was something else, longing, almost desperation, that made her heart ache. Celine's hands, trembling, lifted to his face. She expected him to pull away, to mock her boldness, but instead his eyes softened when she touched him. His stubble scratched her palm, warm and real, and for the first time she saw more than vengeance in him. She saw a man carrying wounds too deep to heal. "Kale," she whispered, her voice breaking. His lips crushed hers in answer, swallowing her name like it was the only thing keeping him alive. The kiss deepened, raw and consuming, until she was gasping against him, their bodies tangled in the sheets, their souls colliding in ways neither could deny. Every movement between them became a language of its own. His hands gripping her hips were not just claiming, they were pleading. Her legs around him were not just surrender, but need. When he finally entered her, it was not violence. It was an ache turned into release, a wound turning into healing. Celine clung to him, nails digging into his skin, as Kale buried his face against her neck with a growl that sounded like both victory and pain. She cried out his name, and he whispered hers again and again, each sound threading into the night like a vow. When the frenzy eased, they lay together in the afterglow, her body curled into his as though it had always belonged there. Kale's chest rose and fell beneath her cheek, his hand stroking her hair with unexpected gentleness. In that silence, Celine realized something she never wanted to admit. She did not hate him anymore. The bond between them had shifted, no longer just blood and vengeance, but something far more dangerous. Love was blooming in the ashes of war, and it terrified her more than his anger ever had. For how could she give her heart to a man who might still destroy her world? The morning after came wrapped in silence. Celine stirred in the furs, her body still humming with the memory of Kale's touch, every kiss and every whisper etched into her skin like fire that refused to fade. She turned her head to find him watching her, his gray eyes softer than she had ever seen, yet shadowed with something darker. For a heartbeat, she thought he might smile, might reach for her again, but instead he rose, his muscles taut beneath his scarred skin. He dressed with sharp movements, each gesture reminding her that this man was more than just her lover. He was still the Alpha who had sworn vengeance on her family. Her heart ached with confusion. How could the same hands that had cradled her so tenderly now seem like weapons ready to strike? Kale's silence was heavier than anger. He lingered by the window, the morning sun cutting across his body, painting him in gold and shadow. Celine wrapped the furs tighter around her, feeling suddenly exposed, not from his gaze, but from the emotions tangled in her chest. She wanted to ask him what last night had meant. Was it only lust, only conquest, or something more? But when she opened her mouth, Cale spoke first. "Don't think this changes what you are," he said, his voice low and rough, yet trembling in a way she almost missed. "Your blood still carries betrayal. You can't wash it away with moans and soft skin." His words sliced at her, and yet the memory of his body against hers made them ring hollow. If he truly hated her, why did his hands tremble when he looked at her? The day passed with Cale distant, commanding his pack with his usual authority, while Celine wandered the pack house halls like a ghost. Every step reminded her of their night together, the ache between her thighs, the echo of his growl against her ear. But now the warmth was poisoned by doubt. Was she a fool to think he could love her? Still, when their eyes met across the great hall, something fierce and unspoken sparked between them, and she knew he felt it too. That night, when she tried to sleep, she couldn't. The bond tethering them tugged at her relentlessly, until her skin burned with the need to feel him again. Cale found her before dawn, his presence filling the doorway of her chamber. He looked torn, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists, as if he fought himself. "I should stay away from you," he muttered, stepping closer despite his words. "Every time I touch you, I forget what I swore to do." Celine's breath caught as he reached the bed, his shadow falling over her. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his wrist. "Then don't fight it," she whispered. For a long, dangerous moment, he simply stared at her, his chest rising and falling. Then the dam broke. His mouth crashed onto hers, his kiss wild, punishing, and desperate. He pushed her back against the pillows, his body covering hers, his hands exploring her as though he both hated and worshipped her at once. Their bodies moved together again, this time with even greater urgency, like two storms colliding. Cale's growls filled the room, vibrating against her skin, his dominance overwhelming yet intoxicating. Celine's cries mingled with his name, her nails carving red lines across his back as he drove her higher, faster, harder. It was not gentle. It was a battle of passion, of fire and surrender. When it ended, they lay tangled in sweat and breath, his forehead pressed to hers. "You'll ruin me," he rasped, his voice breaking, his hand gripping her as though letting go would destroy him. And Celine, her heart pounding in equal terror and devotion, knew the truth she already had. The days that followed were a storm of contradiction. Cale was fire and ice. One night he devoured Celine with a hunger that left her trembling. The next he stood cold and unreachable, barking orders at his pack as though she didn't exist. But what tore at her most were the stolen moments in between, when he brushed a strand of hair from her face without speaking, when he lingered in the doorway of her chamber, as though drawn by something he refused to admit, when his lips found her forehead in sleep, soft and reverent, as though she were both curse and salvation. Celine found herself clinging to those fragments, even as the shadows of his vengeance loomed over them both. But peace was never meant to last. One evening, during a gathering in the great hall, Celine felt eyes on her. A stranger, tall, dark, and watching too closely. His scent carried the mark of another pack, a rival. Cale noticed too, his body tense beside her, his hand possessively sliding around her waist. The look in his eyes was dangerous, primal. When the stranger's gaze lingered a heartbeat too long, Cale's growl rumbled through his chest, low enough for only Celine to feel. "You are mine," he whispered fiercely against her ear, his grip tightening, his jealousy radiating like wildfire. Celine shivered, both from the fear of his wrath and the intoxicating thrill of being so wholly claimed. That night, his jealousy turned into passion that burned hotter than ever before. Cale pulled her into his chambers with little warning, his mouth crashing onto hers before she could speak. His kiss was savage, full of anger and desperate possession. "Did you like him looking at you?" he growled against her lips, tearing at the fabric of her gown until it pooled at her feet. Celine gasped, shaking her head, but words failed as his hands roamed her body. Rough and hungry, he lifted her effortlessly, pressing her back against the wall, his hips grinding into hers with unrestrained need. "Say it," he demanded, his eyes wild. "Say you belong to me." Breathless and trembling, Celine moaned his name, and the sound shattered what little restraint he had left. The heat between them exploded into something uncontrollable. He claimed her with a ferocity that bordered on madness, every thrust a declaration, every kiss a punishment and a plea. Celine clung to him, torn between fear of his wrath and the ecstasy flooding her veins. Her cries filled the room, mingling with his growls, the sound of their passion echoing through the packhouse walls. When the storm finally broke, Cale's forehead rested against hers, sweat dripping down his temples, his chest heaving. "You drive me insane," he admitted, his voice ragged, his hand cradling her cheek as though she were the only thing tethering him to reality. And Celine, her body trembling in his arms, knew she could no longer deny it. Her heart was his, no matter how dangerous that truth was. Yet as she lay curled against him later, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a whisper of dread coiled in her chest. She knew there were secrets between them, dark truths about her family, about his vengeance, that could shatter everything they had begun to build. And outside the safety of their bed, danger grew. She could feel it in the way Cale's eyes lingered on the horizon, in the way the pack whispered of unrest, in the way her own dreams turned darker with each passing night. Their love was a fire, wild and consuming, but fires could burn, and Celine feared theirs might consume them both before it ever saved them. The storm within Cale seemed to mirror the storm outside that night. Rain lashed against the windows of the Alpha's chamber. Thunder rolled like the growl of an angry god, and yet the fire between them burned hotter than any tempest could extinguish. Celine stood before him, her silk nightgown clinging damply to her skin after running through the rain to find him in the war room. He had been brooding again, staring over maps and battle plans, his mind consumed with vengeance. But when she entered, dripping and trembling, his carefully built walls shattered. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands capturing her face, his mouth devouring hers with a hunger that stole her breath. The taste of rain mixed with his heat, and Celine melted into his arms, knowing that she could no longer separate fear from desire, danger from love. Cale tore the soaked fabric from her body, as though it were an enemy daring to come between them. His lips trailed fire down her throat, his teeth grazing sensitive skin, marking her again and again as his own. "Do you even understand?" he whispered hoarsely against her ear. "What you do to me, Celine? You undo me." His voice cracked, rough with need, with pain, with devotion he could not name. Celine shivered under the intensity, her fingers clutching his hair, pulling him closer, as though he were the air she needed to breathe. His hand slid down her back, cupping her curves, lifting her against him until her legs wrapped around his waist. In that moment, she felt more than claimed. She felt cherished, even if he would never say the words. The bed became their battlefield, and passion their weapon. Cale's kisses grew rougher, desperate, his body trembling as though he warred with himself. Celine gasped beneath his weight, every brush of his mouth and every thrust of his hips a symphony of need that left her undone. She responded in kind, arching into him, moaning his name until it broke from her lips like a prayer. The world outside, rival packs, vengeance, fear, faded to nothing. There was only Cale, his breath hot against her skin, his growls vibrating through her chest, his love and fury colliding in each touch. He moved inside her with such intensity that Celine thought she might shatter, yet she clung to him, begging for more, needing to lose herself in him completely. When dawn broke, their bodies were tangled in the sheets, sweat still cooling on their skin. Cale lay beside her silent, but his arm remained draped protectively over her waist, pulling her against him even in sleep. Celine traced the lines of his chest, marveling at the scars that spoke of battles won and wars survived. Yet the deepest wound was not visible. It was the torment in his soul, the grief of betrayal, the darkness that drove him toward vengeance. She kissed one scar tenderly, her lips lingering over his heartbeat. For the first time, she whispered into the stillness, "I love you." The words trembled, soft as a secret she wasn't sure she was ready to share, but they were true. And though Cale did not stir, she thought she saw the faintest flicker of peace on his face. But peace never lasted long in the world of an alpha. That same day, The rival pack sent their warning. A messenger's body was found at the border, bloodied, broken, with a mark carved into his chest, a symbol of war. The pack murmured with unease, and Kale's fury was immediate. His growl shook the walls, his command sending warriors to fortify the territory. Yet Selene saw something else in his eyes, not just anger, but fear. Not fear for himself, but for her. He pulled her into his arms in front of them all, his lips pressing hard against hers, a kiss that was both a promise and a possession. "They will never take you from me," he vowed fiercely, his voice loud enough for the entire pack to hear. And though Selene trembled at the threat of war, her heart raced at the truth that had always burned between them. She was his, and he was hers, in ways that neither fate nor blood nor vengeance could ever undo. The night before the war broke, the pack was restless. Torches lined the courtyard, shadows dancing across stone walls as warriors sharpened their blades and wolves prowled in anticipation of bloodshed. Yet, inside the Alpha's chamber, another battle was being fought, the one between desire and fear. Selene stood by the window, her hands pressed against the glass, her heart aching as she watched her mate prepare for a war he might not survive. Kale entered silently, his presence filling the room like a storm. "You're trembling," he murmured, his voice low, raw. She turned, eyes shimmering with tears. "I don't want to lose you." His jaw clenched, but when he reached her, his hands cupped her face, and the kiss he pressed to her lips was both desperate and consuming. "You won't. Not while I still breathe." But both of them knew the fragility of that promise. What followed was not gentle. Kale lifted her against the wall, his mouth claiming hers in a frenzy of need, his body pressing against hers with a hunger born of both love and fear. Their clothes fell away as though they were made of air, their skin colliding, slick with desire and desperation. Selene gasped as his teeth grazed her neck, his growl vibrating against her pulse. "You're mine," he rasped, his thrusts rougher, harder, like he needed to brand her body with his before stepping into the battlefield. Selene clung to him, her nails raking down his back, her cries echoing in the chamber. It was wild, frantic, the kind of union that blurred the line between passion and pain, between worship and destruction. And when they both fell apart in each other's arms, panting, trembling, Selene realized this wasn't just lovemaking. It was survival, a memory carved into flesh and soul, in case tomorrow never came. The dawn brought war. The rival pack descended like wolves from hell, their banners drenched in blood, their howls shaking the sky. Kale led his warriors with primal fury, shifting into his colossal wolf form, his eyes blazing like molten gold. Selene watched from a stronghold, every heartbeat a prayer, every cry of battle a knife twisting in her chest. She had always feared Kale's wrath, but seeing him fight for their home, for her, made her blood burn with pride and terror. She felt their bond tug within her, the mate bond alive with every slash of his claws, every drop of his blood. And when she sensed his pain, her scream tore through the battlefield even though she hadn't left the castle. She knew he was wounded. Selene could not stay back. Ignoring the guards' protests, she ran into the chaos, her nightgown torn by claws and dirt, her hair wild in the wind. She found Kale surrounded, his wolf staggering, but still fighting with teeth and fury. Without hesitation, she threw herself between him and a killing blow, her body shielding his. Magic she did not know she possessed flared from deep within her, a radiant light bursting outward, scattering their enemies in a wave of pure force. The rival pack stumbled, howling in pain, retreating as though the moon itself had struck them. Kale shifted back, bloodied, barely standing, his eyes wide as he caught her trembling form. Selene, his voice broke, raw with awe and anguish. He pulled her into his arms, his forehead pressed to hers. "You saved me." She shook her head, tears streaming. "No, you saved me first." And in that broken moment, love became their strongest weapon. The war ended with victory, but the cost was heavy. Bodies lay scattered across the field, and Kale's pack mourned the fallen even as they howled in triumph. In the aftermath, Kale carried Selene back to their chamber, refusing to let her out of his arms. That night, there was no fear, no anger, only love. He laid her down gently, kissing every bruise, every scar, every inch of her, until she trembled with more than desire, with devotion. Their love-making was slow, tender, and endless, as though they had all the time in the world now that fate had spared them. Selene whispered her love against his lips, her body arching beneath him as he claimed her once more, not out of desperation this time, but out of eternity. When dawn came again, Kale and Selene stood hand in hand before their people, the Alpha and his bride, not just bound by vengeance or fate, but by a love so fierce it had conquered even death itself. The war was over, but the scars remained. Kale stood at the edge of the forest, the wind carrying the scent of ash and rain, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. For the first time in years, his shoulders were no longer weighed down by vengeance. He had something stronger now, someone stronger. Selene's hand slipped into his, small but steady, her touch anchoring him to the present. He turned, and there she was, radiant, alive, her hair dancing in the breeze, her gaze holding nothing but love for him. For the first time, he let himself believe he was worthy of it. That night, the pack celebrated beneath the full moon. Songs filled the air, fires burned bright, and wolves danced in a clearing. But Kale and Selene slipped away into the quiet of the Alpha's chamber, where only their heart spoke. He carried her in his arms, as though she were a treasure carved from the stars themselves. When he laid her on their bed, there was no urgency, no desperation, only reverence. His lips mapped every inch of her body, whispering promises in every kiss. Selene sighed his name like a hymn, her fingers tangled in his hair as he worshipped her with a tenderness that shook her to tears. Their love that night was slow and endless, a rhythm of devotion that erased every wound, every shadow. Kale's strength wrapped around Selene like a vow, his touch coaxing her into ecstasy again and again until her cries mingled with his growls. And yet, between the moans and the fire, there was laughter too, soft, disbelieving, as though they both marveled at the miracle of finding joy after so much darkness. When they finally collapsed together, tangled in sweat and silk, Kale pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "No more vengeance. Only us. Only forever." Selene's magic had not vanished. It shimmered faintly beneath her skin, a glow Kale could feel whenever he held her close. The pack spoke of her as a blessing, the moon's chosen, the light to balance their Alpha's fury. And Kale, once feared as the vengeful wolf, now stood tall as a leader reborn, not softened, but steadied, tempered by the woman who had chosen him even at his darkest. Together, they rebuilt not just their home, but their hearts. Years later, when the moon rose high in silver, the pack would tell stories of their Alpha and his bride, the warrior who had led them through fire, and the woman who had tamed the storm within him. But in the quiet of their chamber, Kale and Selene knew the truth. Theirs was not a story of taming, nor of surrender. It was a story of two souls who collided like fire and storm, who burned, who bled, who loved so fiercely the world itself had to bend around them. And as Kale kissed Selene beneath the eternal gaze of the moon, her laughter spilling into his mouth, he knew at last that vengeance had never been his destiny. Love was,